Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, your host and author of the new book, Brand Bewitchery, How to Wield the Story Cycle System to Craft Spellbinding Stories for Your Brand. And great news, you can now get Brand Bewitchery in Apple Books, finally. So you can get your print or Kindle version on Amazon or your ebook version on Apple Books. I hope you'll get yours today. On this special episode of the Business of Story, we are going international to explore the old concept of a story is only as good as its villain is evil. And what better way to explore that than with an American storyteller, myself, and a Russian storyteller, who you will meet in just a moment. Plus, as we explore this dichotomy of good versus bad, how do our stories connect our diverse worlds? All that today on the Business of Story. For my entire life, it's been us against them, America versus Russia. But are we, the people of our two embattled countries, really so different? We allied with the Soviet Union in World War II to beat back Hitler and his axis of evil. But then we quickly became rivals. We had the bomb, then they got one too. Russia caught up in the arms race, creating arch enemies that could destroy the planet. Then they took the lead.
On October the 4th, 1957, Russia launched the world's first space satellite. They called it Sputnik, traveling companion to the Earth. Americans took for granted that theirs was the richest and most technically advanced nation in the world. With Sputnik now orbiting the Earth, all that changed. Russia had won the opening event of the space race.
But Russia didn't rest on its laurels when in 1961, the same year I was born, they placed the first man in space.
All Russia's just wild about Yuri Gagarin, first man to conquer space. Modest, just a family man. It was no secret, either in Moscow or anywhere else, that Russia was ready to make the attempt. At 7 a.m. our time, the 450-ton rocket went up. Gagarin was in radio contact with the ground. In his 4.5-ton nose cone, he orbited once and was back again 108 minutes after takeoff. At Cape Canaveral, the Americans, though disappointed at not being first, are training these men to be astronauts and may still have a man on the moon before anyone else. Moscow prepared to give Major Gagarin a hero's welcome. Nobody talked or thought of anything else. Mr. Khrushchev interrupted his Black Sea holiday to be present. He gave Russia a toast to the man who has won immortal fame, the conqueror of space, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin.
With America's world standing and ego battered and bruised, and not to be outdone by the Russians, President Kennedy made a bold proclamation.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
The unnerving saber rattling continued in 1962 as Nikita Khrushchev placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, the nearest the world's two superpowers ever came to thermal nuclear war.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Upon receiving the first preliminary hard information of this
Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and through diplomacy, Russia agreed to dismantle their missiles later that year. But military, political, and athletic competition between our two countries heated up over the next decade, punctuated by the miracle on ice.
You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow up to Schultz. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
A ragtag team of amateur U.S. college hockey players beat the vaunted Russian superstars 4-3 to win the gold medal in the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York. Then the unthinkable happened in April of 1986, a human and environmental catastrophe that rocked the world.
Moscow television tonight.
От Совета министров СССР. На Чернобыльской атомной электростанции произошла авария. Поврежден один из атомных реакторов.
For the first time ever, the Soviet Union admits it has had a nuclear accident, and it's clearly a major one.
It's almost certainly the most severe accident that has ever taken place in the short history of civilian nuclear power.
Good evening, I'm
The
Ted
nuclear
Koppel, and
generating
this-
station in Chernobyl melted down, critically impacting more than 8 million people in the USSR, Ukraine, and Belarus. Then, 1 year later, President Ronald Reagan stepped onto the dais in front of Berlin's Brandenburg Gate and addressed his adversary.
Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of a vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It wasn't but a few years later in 1991 that the USSR totally unraveled as Mikhail Gorbachev stepped down as its president, beginning the dismantling of the Soviet Union.
Good evening. The red flag came down over the Kremlin tonight as President Gorbachev resigned and brought to an end 7 decades of communist rule in the Soviet Union. Right to the last, Mr. Gorbachev said he was unhappy at the breakup of the country, but he pledged to do everything he could for the new Commonwealth of Independent Republics.
Russia fought back over the next 2 decades to regain its world prominence, and in May of 2012 elected its current president, Vladimir Putin, who would become a formidable adversary. He wasted little time to flex his muscles, evidenced by his actions just 2 years after being elected.
To what America is officially calling a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russian troops spreading out throughout the strategic Crimean Peninsula. President Obama speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin, apparently pulling no punches, although it is unclear what the White House can really do about all of this. So let's go straight to ABC's Alex Marquardt.
Then Russia invaded our presidential elections in 2016, presumably to help elect Donald Trump.
Over the course of my career, I have seen a number of challenges to our democracy. The Russian government's effort to interfere in our election is among the most serious. And as I said on May 29th, this deserves the attention of every American. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Never in history has an American president been so ingratiated to a Soviet or Russian leader, which has the world scratching its head asking, to what end?
I mean, the man has very strong control over a country. Now, it's a very different system, and I don't happen to like the system, but certainly in that system, he's been a leader far more than our president has been a leader.
Putin, the man who invaded Ukraine, annexed Crimea, backs the brutal Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, crushes those who oppose him inside Russia, and may well be responsible for the hack of the Democratic National Committee's computers. That Vladimir Putin, Trump says, outshines President Obama.
Now we find our two countries united not in philosophy, but in battling a global pandemic, which is impacting our health and in some cases our very survival. it's also pounding our economies and impacting our very way of life. In the midst of this mayhem, Russia announced just last week its moonshot for eradicating COVID with something they call Sputnik 5.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country has approved a coronavirus vaccine and will vaccinate tens of thousands of people, including healthcare workers, this month. And he says one of his own daughters has already taken a dose. Naora Barzev is a professor and vaccine specialist at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
It's good news in the sense that we want more than one winner here. This isn't really a race to the finish line. We all have to get there together. And many companies are manufacturing doses at high volume at risk without knowing yet the results. I guess the concerning thing, though, is the plan to roll out the vaccine for widespread use concurrently with the beginning of phase 3 trials is a little bit putting the cart before the horse. And usually the process would be...
Is this vaccine the real thing or just another way for a political party to position itself? You know, more fake news. Well, I guess time will tell. But it does lead me back to my very first question. Even though our ideologies are diametrically opposed as countries, led on both sides by cabals of elitist leaders whose self-interests govern their politics over the people they serve, are the kids, moms, dads, businessmen and women of America and Russia really so different? What do you say we explore that question with a good friend I've made coming to us all the way from Russia?
I tried telling this story before a year passed, and each time I tried it, with this anger inside, I got the response that I'm jealous, I'm angry, and I'm the small, little, puny boy who is just, pointing the finger at the big bully. But when I told it this way, after realizing that I'm not the victim, the reaction was, wow, Artem, thank you for telling it. Your story is something I needed to hear right now in my life. I feel more courage. And I haven't anticipated that this small shift in perspective about your story, exactly as you said, I found the bully, and that cured me.
Artem is a Russian business storyteller who has reached out to storytellers from around the world. He's the board member of the Storytelling and Organizations Interest Group of the National Storytelling Network and the founder of the very first Russian story consulting agency, Academy Historia. Artem helps people and organizations find their authentic stories to solve business challenges. He has personally interviewed more than 50 international storytelling experts and trained over 2,000 people in storytelling. You will learn, as I did in interviewing Artem, that our worlds aren't so different after all. And in fact, it is the power of story that unites very diverse worlds. So please welcome to the Business of Story my new friend, Artem Mushin-Makedonskiy.
Hey, Park, great to be here.
You're coming to us all the way from Russia, but where in Russia are you?
It's a small town called Korolyov. It's in the suburbs of Moscow. And basically, this town has a lot of history because here is where the space history of the humankind started, with Gagarin being the first man in space. So
you had to rub that in a little bit, didn't you? So is that the same as Star City, or is that something else?
Well, you could call it Houston. It's the same as Houston, yeah.
Your mission control.
Yeah, exactly.
You and I got a chance to get acquainted a couple of months ago when you were so kind to have me on your show, and I was fascinated about how you were using storytelling in Russia and what we can all learn from that. Give us a little bit of your backstory, and how did you find yourself here in brand development work, marketing work, and using storytelling in Russia?
Well, I've started as an HR consultant. I'm a rare person that educated himself in psychology and then started working by the specialty in psychology and HR consultant. So I've been doing this for 3-4 years. And then when I was working at a bank as a learning and development manager, because I got tired of consulting, I discovered storytelling because of my wife. You'll be laughing, but that it's true. She's a narrative psychotherapist. It's a huge and deep approach to stories that is healing in terms of the work of stories. It has a lot to do with healing. And she actually inspired me to think how stories can heal the organizations. But at that time, I just did nothing and didn't understand the deepness of it. I remember reading Paul Smith, Lead with a Story. That was the first book I've read. And then, after reading 6 books in Russian about business storytelling, I went to Amazon and my jaw dropped because there was like heaps of literature. And I started reading. At some point, I was like, okay, reading is too slow. I need to interview those guys. And I just started writing to people and organizing a small YouTube channel and just gaining up the momentum. And at some point, I was really wondering if I can make a career out of it, but I was really doubting because I didn't see anything equal to it in Russia. But
so was this what you were doing at the bank? So you were in HR, you learned this narrative psychology from your wife, and I'm assuming that's really understanding people's backstories and digging deep and having them, they may be telling themselves one story, which could be complete fiction when they could be living into another more powerful story. So were you applying that at the bank?
Exactly. I was trying to. I didn't have enough knowledge, and I was trying my best to, help people tell their stories and tell my stories. And in that time, I thought I can make a career out of storytelling. But there was a fateful encounter. The last chapter, we're getting to the current times. It was when I got kicked out of the bank. The new manager just didn't like me, and I thought
didn't like you. What's not to like?
Well, we were different. Like she was a sort of corporate person. I was too open-minded and too creative, I guess. But then again, I didn't fit with the times and the organization. And at that time, a fellow of mine said, I have a project where I have to have help government officials tell their stories about their projects. And I thought, well, I can give it a try. And I did. And I stayed in this path because I was fascinated not by how my stories influence people, but how I can dig out people's stories and help them tell. And that got me really on fire. And I helped bring this fire to the world. So I just help people tell their stories.
Well, in your notes you sent me, you said Murray Nossel had a big impact on you, and I've had him on the show as well, and he is so much about story listening, that all great stories begin with the listener. How did you apply that in your work?
Well, Murray is an awesome human being, and his main principle of what happened made a huge impact on my work. And actually, there is a distinction. Here comes the funny part. In English, telling what happened is exactly equivalent to telling a story. Like, if I tell you, I don't like my boss, that's not the answer to what happened. That's not a story. But in Russian, you have 2 translations to the word what happened. One is literally what happened, like a dot, a stop in the time. And the other one is what was happening, like the sequence of events. And if in Russian you use the first one, you don't get a story because you get the phrase, I got fired. It's just a fact. But if you say the other words, you get, oh, one day I came to my job and my boss said, hey, Artem, come here. And that's a story. So that part, I just started experimenting, and Murray did a huge help to us. He actually participated in our conference last year, and that was awesome.
So how do you use it now in the work you do?
Well, honestly, I try to explain to people that storytelling is not about storytelling. It's about story. And to understand story, you just need to understand that it comes from 2 basic things. Trying to tell what happened, like what was happening, and answering to the right questions. And my role is just to ask these questions. There's like, I can ask you a question like, tell me a story about your background. And it's a huge question with different answers. But I can ask you a question which I really love, and that question helped me some while ago define my passion in work I do. And it goes like this. Can you tell me about a moment in your work when you gave your whole self to help someone and were extra proud of the results that person achieved? This is a question aimed at a specific spot and time, and it describes a certain set of events. It's like aiming your camera at a certain part of a human being's life. And that's the work I'm trying to do. I'm trying to shine the spotlight on exactly the parts people need to tell to form a great identity, a better brand about themselves, in their selves, and for the outside world.
And stories really are all about a moment in time, aren't they? And while storytelling is this big, colossal thing you've got to learn, it really comes down to that simple. And I like your analogy of aiming a camera at a spot in time, highlighting it and capturing that, because that moment can tell us so much about the person, about the brand, or about what you were trying to uncover. I can see where you probably got that from your wife. I would imagine she is digging up a lot of these kinds of stories and people to help them.
Exactly. Yeah, she's been doing a great job. Like, I mean, I cannot imagine how a person can come up with shopaholism and just leave with totally controlling his finances. That's just miracles happening by stories. And actually, my wife got not only storytelling into my life, but the second part of the surname. I actually originally was Mushin, and she was Makedonskaya. And we did not want to, take over the surname of another. We just made it mutual. And now my son, Konstantin, will hate us for the rest of his life because all the documents, all the blanks, you imagine how much he was going to write.
I got you. Let's go back to that moment in your life, because I'm curious about it. You got fired from the bank, so a place that you liked. Can you take us to that moment when she came in and she leveled the blow on you, what that felt like, and then what you felt like moving forward?
Oh, that was an interesting and insightful moment. Actually, for a year, I was very angry because for 2 months, we haven't talked in a while with her, like two or three times. And then one day I just come to the job after being sick through the weekend. I come home, I come to the office late because I was at the doctor's, and I just told everyone, guys, I'm going to be late. No worries. I'm going to stay late. So no worries. And she said, okay. And the next day, she comes in and she says, well, Artem, let's go and chat. We have a thing to discuss. And I'm like, oh my God, my new boss wants to talk with me. Finally, through 2 months in, she's here. And I entered the room, and instead of seeing the room empty, I see the corporate legal person who was seen firing different people. And at this exact moment, I feel like my chin is lowering. My spine is literally covered in thick layer of sweat, and at the same moment I was so inspired, I go overwhelmed, and I go inside and I'm saying, like, what did I do wrong? And I don't know what it was. And he tells me, well, Artem, you see, you violated our trust. You made it so you came to the office late, and by the book, and he takes out a code of labor, Russian book. And I'm just like, do I supposed to know it, or can we just talk it out? Okay, well, and it goes on in this corporate style, and she just goes silent. And I was so angry for a year. I was mad at her. I was vicious. But then a year later, I encountered the work of Michael Margolis, who has also a great episode on your podcast. Thanks to you, man. That's awesome. And I read in his book a phrase that really cured me. He said that in every story there is a villain and there is a hero, but you don't know if your villain has a villain of his own. And at that moment, I realized she's not the villain. She's a victim. She's a victim of a system where she cannot be open-minded and open with me. And I felt like I'm not angry anymore. I feel like helping these people to become more open through storytelling and through various methods. And from this anger, I came to conclusion that, well, I was just, naive, and I should have anticipated it. So that's my story.
That's so interesting. Every villain has a villain of their own. When you said that, it made me immediately think about bullies or people that say nasty things to other people. And then you take it, personally. You think, why is this person now my villain? Why are they, we have a saying in America, maybe you have it there. They're just kicking the dog. You happen to be the dog that day, but there's something else that is driving them, and it's not necessarily you. So they have their own villains. It could be the villain of fear. It could be the villain of the system that you're talking about. It could be a villain of upbringing. Maybe they had parents that talked down to them all the time. So that's the only way they know how to communicate. But isn't it hard from a personal standpoint to be able to take that and not take it personally and feel like they're just out to get me, when you have to really stop and think about their story and what villain are they combating of their own that is just simply being expressed now onto you?
Yeah, that's just on point. And what I want like to mention in this part, because we're trying to tell our story, and I tried telling this story before a year passed, and each time I tried it with this anger inside, I got the response that I'm jealous, I'm angry, and I'm the small little puny boy who is just, pointing the finger at the big bully. But when I told it this way, after realizing that I'm not the victim, the reaction was, wow, Artem, thank you for telling it. Your story is something I needed to hear right now in my life. I feel more courage. And I haven't anticipated that this small shift in perspective about your story, exactly as you said, I found the bully and that cured me.
And why do you think it helps your audiences have a better understanding of what they're dealing with?
Well, in terms of your story and telling it to be more vocal in this world, it doesn't matter even if it's your individual story or your brand story. You always need to be aware of the context. And the context is changing. And exactly why Murray Nossel is writing that every story will change eventually. So you need to be open to it, not because your experience is not valuable or it's just changing. It's the power. It's not a drawback. It's actually your resource, because if your memory and your stories are changing, you yourself can become a better human being after analyzing these stories. And that's a way to tell a better story about yourself and help others.
Well, and I was just looking up while you're talking about that, for all of you listeners out there, if you want to hear that really interesting conversation I had with Murray Nossel, it's show number 158. And what I enjoyed about it so much is just what Artem's talking about here, is he professes story listening first and foremost. So to really create understanding and empathy and try to get yourself out of the story so that you can hear what's going on in your audience's mind, in your customer's mind. You can do that deep digging. How have you used this experience now, Artem, in helping your customers and clients grow their brands or to find their true brand story?
Well, this experience and a couple more helped me understand the basic pattern between the stories and the brand that connects to the audiences. Because for some time, I was thinking that my brand identity, my true self, was something like helping you tell your story to clarify your business and your message. And that sounds great. Like, that sounds logical, that sounds strong, but something didn't click and something didn't fall into place. And after analyzing a heaps of stories about my true moments of being my true self, I realized that it's not actually the true purpose. Let me just give you an example. I had an instance on this project I've encountered in the beginning of my career when I came and I thought I was going to do storytelling, but then instead they needed me to listen out their stories. And there was a person who was very shy and he gave a lot of technical details about his project, which actually helped entrepreneurs check their business so that it doesn't fail and it isn't closed by the government or the officials. And then I asked him to tell me about people, about two or one people that inspired him to make this project happen. And he told me a funny story that his colleague Sergey opened the business and got closed in 3 months because he opened a cafe in a house where other people lived. And he didn't know that people are going to get angry at something, and it's easy to close him down. And his other friend, Rashid, he got kicked out of the bank because he exited 80% of his cash in cash from his account, and it's not legal in Russia to do it if you're a sole entrepreneur, and he didn't know it. And those two instances just influenced him and inspired him. And when he was telling his story, people leaned in and they listened to him. And then afterwards, I saw people just putting his number down on the paper. And after a year, I came to Sergey, just, suddenly there was the sense that I need to write to him. And he said that his project won a grant, and now every Russian region has an access to him because of the resources that he gained, because he was telling this story. And after analyzing such instances in my job, I realized that my true brand identity, I would say, or true self, is not about helping you tell your story. It's about giving you the knowledge so that you can get the sense that you and your ideas are valuable to other people. There's no word storytelling anymore about me because it's deeper than storytelling. Storytelling is what I do. And this is about what I'm going for, my purpose. And I see the connection between stories and purpose and branding.
So do I have that story right, that he had started this solopreneur in his apartment, in his building somewhere, and was doing work, and his neighbors got upset with him doing work there? Plus, he had taken out 80% of his savings in the local bank, which was illegal in your world. And those two worlds collided to kind of, maybe foil that particular business. But in that process, in sharing what he learned and what he went through, that the other people came to him to start trying to figure out how not to have that happen to them.
Almost. It was actually his two friends that came to him and told their negative stories. Sergey and Rashid, two people. But he was so moved by those stories that...
I got you. Was he a Russian official in the government of some sort?
He's
heard
just
this?
an entrepreneur and just a nice guy.
Oh, interesting. So now, while you are part of the storytelling network and story is a big part of you are not using the word story as much. You are more about excavating these moments and these stories out of people so that they can embrace them and run businesses or follow careers that are in alignment with their particular story or their personal narrative. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Because I feel that it is more valuable to excavate those stories, those events. I even use 5 words that replaced stories for me. They go like moment, time, situation, instant, and example. I try to look for those words instead of looking for stories, and people give me stories, even not knowing that they do.
So you're asking them, as you mentioned earlier, give me a moment when something happened, or give me a time, which triggers that moment because you've got a time stamp in there. A situation, so something had to have happened. There's action, which takes you back to that moment because all stories are about moments in time. You had instance. Did you say, how is that different, say, than a situation?
Instance is like a moment of realization because it's a hard translation from Russian, but it's close to the word moment. But if you shine more light, like a bright moment, then you get this essence of the Russian word I'm thinking about right now. So, like,
what's the word? You got to share the word with us.
Момент вдохновения. It's actually 2 words. But if you say момент in Russian, like moment, it's a bit more than a moment in English. Like, let me give you an example. We have a word that goes for event. It's called событие. And if you take it apart, событие. Бытие is essentially being. So it's co-being, being together, not about event. It's about being together with people. And that's the essence of the word. I'm trying to translate it, but there's no equivalent.
It's interesting. Give us another example. So time. Does the word, the Russian word for time, does it have a different meaning than what we know it as?
No, I guess it doesn't. It goes like время, but I don't. I'm not a linguist by design. I'm a psychologist, but there are 2 words that I wanted to share with you that have an interesting twist in Russian language, and they go for 1 word in English, and they go for why. So if you say why in English, you can mean why being the reason, or why being the motive for something. Like, there's a model by Simon Sinek, the Golden Circle. It's widely known, and in the center of it there is a why. And when Simon discussed the why concept, he said it's the purpose, the belief, and the reason for being. So the past tenses and the future tenses in this word are mixed. But when you turn it to Russian, you get two words that stand for why. The first one goes for почему, and the second one is зачем. And you can hear that the latest part of this word, this чем, it's similar. And that's exactly the same word. Let me just break it down for you. So if you go with the first word, почему, it's literally translated by what? Like, if you went by the main street, I can say that you went по чему. Your feet were touching the main street. And if I go with the second word, зачем, it's as if I'm pulled forward by something. I'm going to get bread. That's зачем I'm going. For what? And in these words, you can see that почему, the why from the past, is talking about events that happened in the past. Like if I ask my son, почему you did this? I'm mentioning that he was angry, or he had a motive, or he just misbehaved. And if I say зачем you did this, I'm asking actually for what did you need? Why did you do this? Like, what did you want to get out of it? Why did you wanted a cookie? That's why you opened the jar? Like, or why did you do this in terms of past? And it goes like, I'm mad at you. So those two words stand for why. And if you place them inside the golden circle, the why from the future is more outer layer, and the why from the past is an inner layer. Like an example from the Steve Jobs, and this is quite famous. His why from the future, his purpose, was once formulated like create instruments for the mind to develop humankind. That's a mission. That's something in the future. That's a great brand statement. But then we think about почему, the reasons, and we understand that he was living up and working in the times where IBM sold big computers to big corporations, and the tiny humans didn't value too much. They were just worthless. And this past, this почему, this road he followed, turned him to understand what he is following. But here's the tricky question. In Russian, if you ask someone почему, you don't get a story. You get because I and blah, blah, blah in interpretation. But if you ask them where or when or what happened, you get the essence of their story. Like a short example here. If I ask you why you're doing your job, why is your company so valuable and so meaningful? You can say, well, we are changing the world. Again, second trial, I can say, when was the time where you first understood that your company is changing the world for the better? Or when was the moment in your life when you realized you wanted to change something and created this company? And these facts, they form your why from inside. This is the deepest layer. And they help you formulate your зачем, your future why, your brand statement. I hope I didn't get you too mixed up in those Russian words. It can get tricky even for Russians.
No, to me, it seems like logic, brain, emotional side. So logically, I went by the cookie jar logically to do this. The other one is what motivated you to do that. So we, in the branding world and businesses, often get really locked up in that logical side. We're going to change the world for the better. But why? I often say your brand narrative is not about what you make, but what you make happen. And so the way you've explained these double whys, the first one is what you make. The second one is what motivates you. How do you actually have an impact? What do you make happen in the world? And that's what people care about.
Exactly.
They don't care so much about the vehicle because we live in this land of abundance. So people have abundant choices to select about any product or service that you could imagine. There's no scarcity in this world that we live in. So there has to be a bigger person, as Simon Sinek pointed out, and as your double why here. So you're just trying to move people into that emotional brain that says, Why emotionally do you do that? And it's probably triggered by an event or events that have happened in your life. Let's dig down to those. And I can hear your wife coming in here, the psycho-narrative style of that, because it's very true. Because it is the events and what we experience that shape and inform who we are today. Artem, I did a TEDx about 3 years ago, and it was titled, Stop Looking for Your Story and Start Finding Your Scenes, those moments that have shaped who you are today. When you find those scenes, you knit them together and your story reveals itself, or your story finds you, basically. And I think that's what you're talking about with this.
Exactly. That's right on point. And in narrative psychotherapy, if we get back to it, we have different terms, like you have an instance or an episode, and that stands for a scene or, a moment. That's equal. And if you talk about a story, like I'm not responsible, that's a story in the narrative approach. And then you get a narrative, like in even higher level, like my wife is going to be angry at me if I mess someone up, but let me try one. Russia is not going to prosper under the reign of irresponsible people. That's a narrative, like that's a discourse, a belief that is made up by these small stories. That's just one example.
Yeah, and so brands get locked up into this big narrative, although they've got to have that narrative because it sets the stage or it creates the context for their story. But then they have to drill down and find their individual stories, those moments you talk about. I do something, Artem, called the OOH exercise in branding, OOOH. And the 3 O's stand for, first one is organization, second one is offering, and the third one is outcomes. And I ask my clients and participants going through this, or in the online course, you can do this too, is give me 3 words for each one of those categories. So give me 3 words that define your organization, 3 words that define your offering, and 3 words that define your outcome. Once they've arrived at those words, then I say, now you owe me 9 stories. I want one little short story that each one of those words is a theme to. And it gets them to boil down out of their big narrative head, their logic-driven head, into moments in time where they've had the impact in the world that they seek to have, that what they make happen around them. And they find that they have these 9 short stories then, 3 for each one of those categories, 1 story per themed word, and it gets them thinking in what you're talking about in moments and instances. And it's a really great exercise because at first people go, I don't have a story. I can't even possibly think of a story for that. Well, maybe the word is innovation, which everybody throws out. And I try to dissuade them from that because it's not terribly distinctive. But give me a story where innovation has showed up in your life, in how you've helped someone be innovative in what you do. And to your point, it can be a short story. It can be a moment in time. You can tell that story in under a minute. But what it does is supports the overall brand narrative with these short little stories. Find your scenes and your story will find you.
That's a great exercise. And it resonates on me on so many levels because it's logical. And again, going back to emotional roots, I remember Annette Simmons writing about the method called the story in a word, where you get a word out and you ask people to get the story. And I know you have an episode with her, and it's also awesome. And you guys need to listen to it wherever you are. Park is amazing.
Yeah, Annette came on, 5 years ago when I first launched the business of story. And yeah, she has a terrific book out. So what if you have a new brand sitting down across from you now and they are lacking vision and a mission and they just don't have their act together? What's the first thing you do to help get that person, that could be a CEO, a founder, maybe it's their head of marketing, to start thinking in story? Do you always start with that moment thing, or do you have an exercise you take them through?
Oh, that's a great question, Park. I usually do it 2 ways. Sometimes I see a person next to me and he's like grown storyteller. He knows how to tell stories, and then I just launch into this. Well, tell me about a time where you felt that you are inspired enough to risk it all and get to be an entrepreneur or a business founder. and he just tells me a lot of stories. But some people, and that's the majority, by the way, they tend to be locked in. So first thing that I do is I tell my personal story, and that's thanks to Mike Adams. He also says that if you want to get a story from someone, you need to tell your story first, and then I ask for a question that doesn't demand the story. I ask, like, tell me about a moment, a small moment in time when you got inspired. And usually people say something like, well, I saw that my product made a difference. And I said, wow, what happened before that? Oh, okay, I get it. And what happened between these moments? Oh, wait, I didn't quite get it. What happens between this and this? And from 2 spots and 2 dots, I make 3 dots, and then I make a line, and more dots come up. And just at some point, people get like, well, am I telling a story? I'm like, no, you're not telling a story. You're just sharing your knowledge. No worries. We're not doing storytelling here. That's nonsense.
So that's hysterical. So you have to break down their barriers. Let me ask you this: in Russia, is storytelling in business and government affairs and whatever, is it frowned upon, or how open are they to story?
Oh, that's a good one. It depends on the openness of a corporation. We have a lot of corporations that are international, like we have Accenture, and they really dig into storytelling. They have storytelling as a corporate value, and I love these guys. And some people are just like, okay, here's the thing. I once heard a person tell me to a question that went like this: what is storytelling? He answered, I guess it's about a lot of retailing, because sto, this first 3 letters, is 100 in Russian. So 100 retailing. That's the way he understood this word storytelling. And I just went like, oh no, that's not about retailing. That's not retail. That's story, the other word. And so the contrast is extra big. In big cities, you get understanding of storytelling because people know English more, and storytelling is an English word. We don't have an exact translation.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we
you use
don't.
the English word.
No, I try to use the word story because we have a word Historia in Russian, and we don't have the word for storytelling. We can't have the telling of the story, which goes like рассказывание, story, the verb and the noun, but it doesn't get you to the essence. And if I say story working or story listening, you cannot translate these anyhow. And people are like, what? How do you work with? Are you a writer? We work with stories, and it gets a lot of tension. So I just omit these, and I try to get them thinking in the moments, just like this.
Historia, does that mean history in Russian? Historia.
Oh, Historia means story, but the word you mentioned, and I just love it, Historia, it's actually a predecessor for the word story. And translated from Greek, it means the moment when a human being is analyzing a previous experience and getting some new knowledge to help him survive. And it's exactly the analysis he's doing, and at the same time, the results of this analysis. So when I get people to get coached or trained after the training, I explain, so now you get that we don't do storytelling. We're trying to make historia happen between us to exchange these knowledge that we have inside us.
Which is story and storytelling, because it takes you to a moment in time, and we just describe it as storytelling in English, but you don't have that word for it. That's quite fascinating. What do you think is the greatest obstacle for you to work with brands in Russia around story?
Well, apart from not using the word storytelling and its any Russian equivalent, I would say that people tend to think that they know how to tell a story, because it's all around like, oh yeah, we had storytelling. We had a TEDx where our top management team went out and told stories. And I had an instance in my life that I really am not proud about. I came up to a top manager, a CEO of a pharmaceutical company here in Russia, and we had 15 minutes to prepare for her speech because there was no gap. There was no time frame for prepare. And I said, well, I'm a bit anxious and I'm worried that I can prepare you in 15 minutes, but let me just start by saying, how much do you know about storytelling? Have you told stories professionally, strategically before, like with an intention? And she said, yeah, a lot of the times. And then I was worried a bit. I gave her a leadership story deck, which we brought to Russia and translated in from David Hutchins. And she, after a week, she went on stage. And the first thing I hear is, dear friends, we need to get focused around development. Development is essential in the modern world. And if you do not develop yourself, and I'm just like sitting there freezing because I feel that the whole audience is listening to the CEO and they start to get their mobiles out. And I'm just like, okay, now I failed miserably because I should have done something to warn her, but I didn't have any power over that. And now I have this story that helps me trigger this response like, can we check if the top management can tell a story? And I say, yes, we can.
So you were hoping she was going to get up there and tell a story to warm the crowd up, create some context and get them going. And she just launched right into the logical. And now we're going to do this.
Yeah.
How often do we all see that in corporate America?
Oh, yeah. That's the same
logical
in Russia.
brain. The logical brain, the rational mind takes over. So, Artem, my last question for you. I want for you to take us to a moment that you've experienced that has been inspiring in the worst of times. And I'm really pointing at the last few months of COVID. I imagine you all are dealing with it over there as well. And it's tough on business. It's tough on health and personal life. Can you take us to a moment of inspiration that you've seen in the midst of all this madness?
Oh, that's a good one. It got me reflecting. I had a workshop, an online training that I host on storytelling, and there were 70 people in a group. And I don't know how, but I got courageous enough and I asked a volunteer to tell a story. And the question went like this: tell me about a time when you felt your true self. That's a hard question, but it can lead to some great stories. And then a girl came up and she said, well, once I put up a fence in my country yard and went silent. And I thought, well, now I'm in a trap. If I don't dig out a story, the whole other group, the rest of them, is not going to follow me and they are not going to learn. And I said, well, what happened before that? And she said, well, I went to my countryside and I enter my house and the backyard and I see children running around. I don't have any children. Those are not my children. And I think, like, whose children are those? And she says, it's the children of the neighbors. And I say, what would they do there? And she says, well, my neighbors didn't warn me that they're going to take down a building that separated our territories. And that day, what I did was I came up to the neighbors. I haven't spoken to them once in 10 years. We're not acquainted even. And I said, I want to pick up a fence, and just put a fence between our territories. And they were so blessed by it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to enjoy the solitude of being on my own territory. And when I finished working, I just felt that it's not about solitude. It's about working with your own hands. And you know, Artem, what really inspired me there was that after this, we greet each other every morning. So there was no fence and we were enemies. Now there is a fence and we are friends for life. This is a paradox for me, my friend. And everyone was blasting with great senses like a fence can make you friends, or you need to ruin your neighbor's children's lives to get to solitude. And they were laughing and they were getting sense out of it. And I was feeling so joyful that even in this COVID times, without the screen, without the camera, a great question and the great trust into a human being that his experience or her experience is a story can make a story happen. That's what really inspired me in this COVID times.
Well, Artem, thank you for that. What a great story. What a great way to round out today's show. And thank you for taking the time to be here. Where can people learn more about you and the work you do?
Oh, thank you, Park, for joining, for for calling me on this, because your podcast is amazing and it's full of inspiration. You can find me easily on Facebook. My wife actually developed my login. I'm going to tell you the truth. My login was businessstorytelling.ru, stands for Russia, and that's too long. And she started searching and found that you can go with .tel, like the telephone. And now my login everywhere, Instagram, Facebook, website, is Your Story Tell. Your Storyteller. And you can put a dot between Your Story and Tell and get to my website, or you can go with Your Storytell and reach me on Instagram and Facebook and my YouTube account. So Your Storytell is a way to find me.
And that's tell with one L, correct?
Exactly.
That's terrific. Pretty smart. Sounds like you're married to an awfully smart woman there.
She is. And she's also sweet.
Well, Artem, thank you. And thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. I never thought I would start a show with the Russian national anthem, so I'm going to bring in Ray to take us out.
Oh, beautiful, far heroes proved.
If you enjoyed today's show, and how could you not with the amazing stories coming from Artem, please share it with a friend, family, loved one, colleague that you think would benefit from hearing the show. And if I can be of service to you, check me out over at businessofstory.com. Order your new book of brand bewitchery right now on Amazon, your print or Kindle version there. And of course, you can now go to Apple Books to get it. And please join me next week when I will have another amazing story artist right here for you like Artem. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Now, Artem, it's your turn. How do you say story on in Russian?
Продолжайте рассказывать истории, друзья.
Success, be nobleness, and ever again divine. And you know, when I was in school, we used to sing it something like this. Listen here. Oh, beautiful, far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain, far purple mountain majesties, above the fruited plain. But now wait a minute, I'm talking about America, sweet America. You know, God done shed his grace on thee. He crowned thy good. Yes, he did.